In 1920, a 10-year-old girl died in a quiet Quebec village. There was no crime scene, no screams heard by police, just a child's body covered in wounds. Her name was Aurore Gagnon, and her death would haunt Canada forever. Aurore Gagnon was born in 1909 in Saint-Philomène de Fortierville, Quebec, a farming parish where life was hard, faith was central, and families kept their troubles private. Nothing about the village suggested the horror that would unfold inside one home. By most accounts, Aurore's early childhood was ordinary. She lived with her parents and siblings, helping on the farm. But in 1918, everything changed. In 1918, Aurore's mother died. Her father, Aurore Gagnon, remarried quickly. Her new stepmother was Marie-Anne Hood. Within 2 years, Aurore would be dead. Neighbors began to notice changes. Aurore appeared withdrawn. She limped. She bore visible injuries. But in a time when family authority went unquestioned, no one intervened. On February 12, 1920, Aurore Gagnon died at just 10 years old. At first, her death was treated as an illness, but the truth could not stay hidden. The coroner's examination revealed dozens of untreated wounds, burns, bruises, severe infections. The official cause of death, blood poisoning and extreme exhaustion. This was not an accident, it was prolonged abuse. The people of Fortierville were stunned. How could something like this happen among them? One neighbor, Exilda Auger, spoke plainly. People will talk, and rightly so. Provincial officials arrived, a coroner, a police officer, a medical examiner. The inquest was held inside the parish church itself. The conclusion was clear. Aurore had not died naturally. Aurore Gagnon and Marie-Anne Hood were arrested. They were charged with negligence, mistreatment, and ultimately homicide. The case moved to Quebec City. In April 1920, the trials began before the Court of King's Bench. Witnesses described what they had seen. Doctors testified to months of abuse. The courtroom listened as the details emerged. Was the stepmother solely responsible? Was the father complicit? Or was guilt shared by a community that chose silence over action? The court answered only part of that question. Marie-Anne Hood was sentenced to death by hanging. Aurore Gagnon received life imprisonment for manslaughter. Public outrage focused almost entirely on the stepmother. The father faded from attention. Marie-Anne Hood was pregnant. Her execution was delayed. In July 1920, she gave birth in prison to twins. Public sympathy shifted. Just 2 days before her execution, her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. She was transferred to Kingston Penitentiary. She would never be free again. Aurore Gagnon served only 5 years. In 1925, he was released for good behavior. He returned to the same village, the place where his daughter died. Aurore Gagnon became more than a victim. She became Aurore. Her story entered books, plays, films, and classrooms, a warning etched into Quebec's memory. Aurore did not die in secret. She died in plain sight. And the question remains, how many others suffered because no one spoke? Aurore Gagnon's death shocked Quebec, but it also raised a disturbing question. How could a child suffer for months without anyone stopping it? In 1920, there were no child protection agencies in Quebec. No social workers, no mandatory reporting. A child's well-being was considered the responsibility of the family alone. Parents held absolute authority. Discipline, even extreme discipline, was rarely questioned. Intervening in family matters was seen as immoral, even sinful. The church was the moral center of rural Quebec. It preached obedience, endurance, and silence. Suffering was often framed as a test of character, not a warning sign. Life was hard. Children worked. Injuries were common. Pain was normalized. Abuse hid easily behind hardship. Neighbors noticed Aurore's injuries. They noticed her fear, but noticing was not the same as acting. Silence became protection for the adults. There was no number to call, no authority to alert, and no legal obligation to speak up. Aurore was trapped, not just in a home, but in a system. After Aurore Gagnon, Canada promised to protect its children. But when the next crisis came, protection took a very different form. In 1934, in Ontario, 5 identical girls were born to a poor farming family. They became known as the Dionne Quintuplets. The world called it a miracle. The government claimed it needed to protect them from their own parents. The state took custody. What followed was not protection, but control. The girls were placed in a specially built compound. Tourists came by the millions. They watched the children through one-way glass. Admission fees were collected. Their lives became a performance. Their privacy vanished. Their trauma went undocumented until it was too late. Aurore Gagnon suffered because no one intervened. The Dionne Quintuplets suffered because everyone did. Two opposite failures. The same victims. As adults, the surviving sisters described loneliness, anger, and loss. Protection had come without compassion. Between silence and control, Canada was still learning how to protect its children. Aurore Gagnon was not alone. She was simply the one whose story survived. Others came before her, and others followed. In the early 20th century, another Quebec child died, under circumstances that troubled her community. Her name was Marie-Paul Morin. Her case never became a legend. It became a footnote. Neighbors noticed bruises, teachers noticed absences, relatives noticed fear. But noticing was not enough. When the child died, explanations came quickly. Illness, weakness, an accident. It was easier to accept these answers than to ask harder questions. Only after death did authorities intervene. An inquiry was held, testimony was taken, and responsibility became difficult to assign. There was no lasting outrage, no national reckoning. The case closed quietly, and the child's name faded. Different families, different villages, the same result. Children suffered in private and were mourned in silence. Aurore Gagnon became a symbol because her case could no longer be ignored. But she represented many more, whose names were never remembered. Aurore Gagnon never had a chance to grow up. She lived in a world where suffering was invisible, and silence was mistaken for virtue. In Aurore's world, no one intervened. In the world of the Dionne Quintuplets, intervention became exploitation. Between silence and control, children were still the ones who suffered. These stories are nearly a century old, but they shaped how Canada began to think about child protection. Not through foresight, but through tragedy, Aurore Gagnon became a symbol, not because her suffering was unique, but because it was ignored. History does not ask us to judge the past. It asks us to recognize it, so we don't repeat it, because the most dangerous place for a child is not always where violence exists, but where no one speaks.